Is the ultimate goal of leftists population control? What is the purpose of borders? And should we criminalize misgendering someone? We take on these questions and more on this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the show where we go through our social media feeds. We try to find some of the most interesting takes, either in a good way or a bad way, and we dissect them and praise or lament them, as the case may be. My name is Donald. I'm here with my co-host, Britt. Before we get started, just a reminder to follow us on socials. You can follow us on Instagram at Good Take, Bad Take Pod, and on Twitter and YouTube at Good Bad Take Pod. And of course, share with your friends if you're enjoying, because it helps out a ton. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into these takes, starting with Glenn Beck, who tweets, "The White House claims Vice President Harris misspoke at an event and meant to say we need to reduce pollution, not population. That may be true, but when their policies destroy farming and manipulate our food supply, it's evident that reducing population ultimately is part of the agenda." What do you think about this take here, Britt?
I think it's a good one. It's a bit reductive, maybe is the way to put it, but it's you hear other people say things like, if the Democrats or some political party wanted to destroy America, like these are all the things they would do, and it's like lines up with everything that they're doing. I'm not exactly sure if it's like population control is like the end goal of a lot of these folks. But I think that they have a warped view of what humanity is and what the purpose of humanity is. And then they value certain things above that, which will naturally lead to policies that do destroy human life, right? So it doesn't need to be a explicit conspiracy of, oh yeah, we want to take the population from 7 billion to 500,000, which there have been people that have said things like that like the best optimal population of the planet is 500,000 people. But I don't know if everyone necessarily subscribes to that, but because they are, don't have a moral framework that upholds and, values human life in the way that, like a Christians or a Jew or even a Muslim, like holds the view of like the sanctity of human life. Naturally, their policies are going to deify, Earth and other value sets that don't actually lead to human flourishing. So it's not a bad take, but I wouldn't say it's a good take or great take, I guess.
Yeah,
but it's right. It's not wrong.
I was gonna say I would say this is more of a good take than a bad take. I think the point that he makes about reducing population being part of the agenda, it is hard to specifically ascribe that to maybe Vice President Harris, but it's not hard to ascribe to people who genuinely have pushed for policies
Yes.
based on that, right? Like you think about a lot of the climate alarmism and a lot of the measures that people have pushed forward to help reduce climate change is reduction in human population. They I mean, it's even still a casual thing to say for average people. Oh, I wouldn't want to bring humans into this world because we've destroyed it, or I don't want to add to the burden of the earth by bringing in more humans who are the ultimate parasites on the earth and things like that. And so whether or not it's specifically Vice President Harris's agenda, I don't know, but I do think that he's correct in that a lot of the policies at their root have been moving towards this as one of, maybe not necessarily the end, but one of their goals and ends has been. I mean, obviously we are not China, but China's one child policy was clearly a population reduction policy. So to think that like the modern world can't have policies that are intending to do this is kind of absurd, because it happened right in front of our eyes, and as we have seen, of course, they've walked back because it's been so disastrous. But you think about things again. The climate alarmism is maybe the biggest, but kind of all the memes about like you will eat the bugs, you will live in the pods, and all of that does have to do with population control. Whether that's through numbers of the population or just the means of where they can and can't live. I think that for those people, having the ability to manipulate your economy, and that includes the people in the economy, is their ultimate goal, which again, maybe numbers up or down isn't the specific goal, but being able to control whether
Yes.
whether you have that ability is in the cards for them. And so I do think that this is a good take overall, even if maybe again, maybe it's not like their number one agenda is reducing population. I think being able to control the population, being able to say let's increase or decrease is part of the agenda for sure.
Yeah, and I think that you're right in that it's a good take that it like because what I was seeing a lot of people say, and this is what he's directly speaking to, is that oh well she meant pollution, not population, as if that like she doesn't at the core of her goal have things that are antithetical to human flourishing. So this is a good way to like sidestep it and put the focus on what really does matter. It's like it doesn't it's kind of like when I maybe you saw the clip of Mike Pence saying, "Oh, that's not my concern."
Yeah.
And it's like he's talking about something else, but like in
Yeah.
practice, he really does behave like America is not his concern
Right.
compared to Ukraine. So it's just kind of a funny like it opens up the dialogue to discuss actually what he is talking about, and the people that don't want to investigate it further are still going to be influenced in a way that is pretty much in line with reality, which is kind of funny. It's reverse disinformation. People the wrong information influencing the actual right perception of
Yeah.
someone.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. I don't think I have too much more on this. So if
Nah,
you're
me
good to
neither.
move on, we'll move to the next. Okay. This tweet comes from David Sachs, who tweets Ukraine is becoming a litmus test for Republican candidates because of the good faith argument that risking World War III over Donbass or Crimea, which are majority Russian anyways, foolishly disregards America's own vital national interests and buys into a bunch of neocon slash mainstream media fallacies. What do you think about this take?
This is a good take, and it's surprising in a lot of ways, right? Like if you think of just within our lifetime, the way that the Republicans, a litmus test for a Republican was, do you support the troops and do you support our intervention in foreign wars, mainly in the Middle East? So this is like quite an about face, and I think it's probably the best thing that ever came out of Donald Trump's presidency is that he suddenly made it cool and awesome for Republicans to be anti-war, right? It was America first, but not in the way that America first leading the spreading of democracy in the world, but America first, like, hey, how about we just stick to our own problems and figure ourselves out here, where, not someplace that is thousands of miles away and doesn't even really think about us on the average day. So I'm really happy to see that this is the case. I appreciate that basically any Republican, like I'm pretty sure he's referring to like the Turning Point USA thing that was going on this past week. Basically any Republican that was on there and all the clips that I saw, if they spoke positively about us, funding and arming Ukraine, generally they got booed. I also saw a poll that was like 95% of Republicans think that we should not be funding or doing anything in Ukraine. Some of that might be like partisan stuff because the Democrats have made it an issue, but regardless, it's just a total about face from where we were just 20 years ago with the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. So I think it's a really awesome thing. I'm glad that it's become a litmus test because I think it is a litmus test of freedom in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I will say that I'm not a fan of Trump, but this is maybe his best single thing that he's done as a candidate and as president is turning the Republican base against that. And the reason why I think that it's so important to turn specifically the Republican Party against this is because you and I both have talked about in a lot of ways how the uniparty exists, and ultimately Democrats may have during the Bush years pretended to be anti-war, but they didn't really do anything meaningful, right? Everyone except for I think Bernie Sanders and voted for these invasions, and like there was no real change. There was some grassroots movement on the left that opposed it, which is good, but they've somewhat fizzled out and gone away during the Obama years. And even during the Obama years, he wasn't really getting called out for all of his horrible things from the right. He was the first president to be at war every single day of his presidency. He opened many campaigns of bombing in intervening in foreign affairs, and he was maybe called out for it when it was politically expedient, very in brief moments or in very select cases. But the movement, it was more like, oh, he really messed this up, not he has a broader position that is wrong and a broader agenda that is wrong. And so the fact that Donald Trump got on there and then turned the grassroots to saying, no, 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 it's okay to criticize this sort of foreign policy interventionism is a mistake. The fact that he was able to do that is marvelous because again, I think if Donald Trump hadn't been in that race, I don't think the Republican Party would have the grassroots wouldn't have moved that way at all necessarily. They wouldn't have been because they almost needed like a permission slip. Like everyone's kind of, he said the quiet part out loud that everyone was thinking but too afraid to say. And so I think that, this has been an amazing thing and I think now it will be incredibly difficult for a traditional neoconservative Republican to run in a Republican primary and win without doing a lot of gymnastics. I think maybe you can see it with like, maybe Ron DeSantis will get the nomination and maybe he'll go back to sort of being more of a neocon that he sort of traditionally is, unfortunately, once he's in office, but he's gonna at least have to pay lip service. And if you look at like Joe Biden, for instance, he really had to pay a lot of lip service to the very progressive left in order to get the nomination last time. And what's ended up happening is his puppet masters have then enacted some of those really, really far leftist policies. Now, is he an AOC by no? Well, maybe because he's a sellout. But as far as being as progressive as her, maybe at core, absolutely not. Is this the ideal of what someone like Marianne Williamson would want? No, no. But he's also very, very more far left than he promised he would be, or that he would originally maybe have been an early. He's not this centrist moderate in many ways. Again, not super super far left compared to some other people, but he's been pushed enough in that direction. And I hope that if a neocon gets into office, I hope that the Republicans can pressure at least some of those concessions in a similar way with the populist movement to say, you're not going to start all these wars. And even though Trump was a big poster child for that, he did end up doing more intervention than I would have liked, although he didn't start new wars, which was good. And maybe some of that pressure holds and stays when a more traditional neocon, if they do get into office. And that would be great because this being a litmus test is super important and it holds up. And like you said, that TPUSA event, I think really did demonstrate that basically every Republican who talked about intervening got booed. And the only ones who kind of passed off well were Vivek Ramaswamy, who talked about this not being a vital interest, and then Ron DeSantis, who kind of squeaked out by saying I wasn't saying we need to do that. There needs to be an objective, and everyone was kind of like skeptically looking at him. But he didn't call for more intervention, and so he didn't really get booed for that, at least.
Well, yeah. What's awesome about this entire about face that has occurred is that it provokes candidates, even if they do pay lip service to it, to pay lip service in such a way that like you look like a really big hypocrite if you go back on it anywhere else, right? So like let's just say Vivek Ramaswamy or Trump or whoever gets in that has paid pretty much like saying like, yeah, we shouldn't be in Ukraine. Why are we arming them? Why are we risking World War III with one of the large superpowers? And then let's just say China invades Taiwan, right? Like it's going to be really difficult and painful to go back on your words, basically, because everyone's going to come out of the woodwork and say, well, you said this about Ukraine. What's different about Taiwan? And sure, there might be there's some intricacies and different things, but it's like at the end of the day, it's on the other side of the country. We deploy everyone, we do nuclear war and all this good stuff. And then at the end of the day, China still takes Taiwan, right? Like, and that's
Right.
the arguments that are being made against us being in Ukraine, which is awesome. So I think it's overall great. I'm happy to see that it is being a litmus test. And I'm also happy to see people like David Sachs, like kind of putting it out there and making it official that this is a litmus test for Republican candidates.
Yeah, absolutely right. And more power to the Republicans who are going in the correct direction on this.
Yeah.
In particular Vivek. I really hope he gets momentum because I don't agree with him on everything, but I feel like he's moving in the correct direction in many ways for the Republican
Yeah.
Party to be more pro liberty. So, all right, Joshua Reed Eagle tweets: "Borders exist to limit governments, not people." What do you make of this take, Britt?
It's what would be the word for it? It's like being really pedantic about the details. Like borders exist, and yes, they exist to limit governments. But what according to this line of thinking, like a government is by the people for the people, so they're
Yeah.
one and the same. Um, you know, like I probably agree with him very much so in the fact that I don't like that governments exist, and that if governments didn't exist, then we probably wouldn't have borders, but we'd have private property, and there's always going to be a line that dictates who can go where at what person's discretion, right? So if you own a piece of property, there is a line that determines whether you have say or not say about whether someone can come over or not, or stay, within that line of property. But we don't have that, right? So our government exists, our government taxes us, our government forces people into conscription to defend our borders and things like that. So it's like if we're going to have all that, then maybe they should at least do the stated functionality that they are, forcing upon us, which is to make sure that people that we, the people of this government, don't want to come in here are not going to be able to come in here, right? They should, if their stated purpose of existence is that, well, you need the government for borders, you need the government to keep law and order. You need the government to make sure that, everyone inside us is safe. It's like, well, then maybe you should at least make an effort to do that, right? If we have borders, might as well fulfill the function of that. And obviously, we're not doing that. So we kind of get the worst of both worlds, where we have a government that takes all these things from us, limits all of our liberties, hoists all these different tax burdens upon us, and then they also don't give us the service that they say they're taking these things from us for.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The thing is, it's like I just find this to be a kind of useless thing to say. It doesn't, like, this doesn't illuminate the issue any better. It doesn't really help explain the nuances. Um and if you're saying borders exist to limit governments but not people, I just wonder then, like, how far does that logic stretch, and why does that the like, what if you are saying that a government is legitimate and has authority, then probably the first thing that it has as a legitimate function is deciding who isn't part of the territory that the government governs, right? Like, in the same way that, as a property owner, your paramount right is the ability to say whether or not someone can exist on your property, or they have to leave. Like, if you're saying a government is legitimate, the government governs people under it. It doesn't get to, you don't get to all of a sudden say, "Hey, I'm living in Mexico, but I want all of the taxpayer benefits from the United States government. I'm just opting into that. I have no other claim. I'm just opting into that." Right? The government would say, "Well, no, you have no, claim to that. We don't. You're not a citizen of us, right?" And so it's just a really weird distinction and arbitrary thing to say, that, like, the government has authority, but it doesn't have the authority to define who it does and doesn't govern. I just don't think that that's a helpful distinction. I don't think it illuminates anything in the debate. And I think, like, if you are pro open border type policies, there are much more convincing ways to make your argument than this, because I don't think that this logic follows in any sort of real way.
Yeah, and the conclusion that people will glean from this is that, like, oh, people should be free to move about wherever they want to move about. And it's like, well, I'm not a pro government person. I'm not a pro borders person in the sense that it requires governments to enforce borders. But it's like, I don't think anyone is actually pro. There might be some people, but no one is pro people can go wherever they want, right? We have a house with a lock on the door for that reason, right? Not just anyone can come into your house. And so if you did away with government, yes, you would do away with borders, but it would not do away with the ability of people to decide who comes and goes on their property. So you would still have the same issue. And like you're saying, it doesn't illuminate it anymore, because it's like, well, property lines exist to, oh yeah, they exist to limit people, right? So at the end of the day, after you reduce all these things of tyranny, you reduce all of this government, you still eventually end up on property lines, and those property lines will eliminate, will limit, not eliminate, will limit the types of people that can come and go from a place.
Yeah, exactly. I just think that, like, the border debate really comes down to, do you believe in private property, and then do you hold that as the tantamount paramount virtue, or do you hold that there needs to be some sort of skeleton framework of government that has a responsibility to defend itself? Because if you believe that there should be a government, even if you believe it's a small government, the primary function of that has to be defending territory. And part of defending territory means not letting, terrorists walk in. So like my thought is like if you are a minarchist, I don't see how you can sort of neglect the function of the government of defense at the border just because you believe in free movement. Like, cool, that's great. People should be able to move, but doesn't that? But if you're saying the government has a duty to protect its people, that means being able to protect it from people walking in the front door too. So it just like the it complete this take just completely ignores like the number one objection someone would have to open borders. No one's saying like, well, the problem is that governments have borders and those limit people. Like, no one's making that argument for its own sake. The reason that they would make that argument most likely is as a defense argument, as well as some, as well as maybe some less common, maybe like racial type of arguments. That's fine, I guess, that you can block off maybe racial or like population control ones, but it doesn't answer again what I think is the primary concern that most people have when it comes to border, which would be security and provision of for existing people, which I don't think this answers clearly at all. All right. Our next take comes from Brad Palumbo, who tweets, "Oh, millennials, you want to criminalize misgendering? That whole make speech I find offensive illegal thing isn't going to work out for you. Many Americans find okay boomer and cisgender and Karen offensive. They could easily use your same logic to ban your speech." And this comes on the heels of a poll that was released, a study that showed a majority of millennials think it should be illegal to misgender someone. And so Brad is responding to that. What do you think about his take?
No, it's a good take. I mean, it's a good take. We could see this same type of the sword you use to persecute your neighbor will be used to persecute you, next year, kind of logic here. It made me, the first thing I thought of was just, all the conservatives that laid out the groundwork for the Patriot Act and were huge proponents of, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. And then now they are on the other side of, well, if you actually care about people, then you have nothing to fear from the vaccine, right? And same sort of people saying, well, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, to the people at the January 6th stuff, having their phones and things seized, and all manners of awfulness. So yeah, everyone should be really careful when they are advocating that any new law be made to do anything to anyone, because at the end of that law, right, is the implication of violence and murder, right? So even something as innocuous as a parking ticket, if I don't pay the parking ticket, I'm going to get a fine. If I don't pay that fine, I'm going to get another fine. And eventually those fines will stack up to such an amount that someone is going to come to my house and say, hey, you've got to pay this. And if I say, well, I'm not going to pay it, then maybe they want to try to arrest me. If I resist that sort of arrest, then usually they have the ability to use some sort of force upon me. So any sort of law that you implement carries the penalty or the potential penalty of death at the hands of a state agent. And so if you want to criminalize someone misgendering, like, you might have the best of intentions with that, but just know that it comes with the potential of, someone potentially being killed over that, as well as that misgendering, something as nebulous of that is going to be expanded upon, even for people who have no intention of, being disrespectful or being intentionally rude to someone. It's like, you could just honestly make a mistake, right? And that's kind of the purpose of language, is to make things specific. And the whole concept of gendering actually makes it much more confusing. And so the only way for you to get rid of any of this stuff is to make it like such a severe sentence that no one is comfortable talking at all about anything. And so it's a terrible, terrible idea. And what sucks, in addition to that, is that, whatever these people implement today, their opponents are going to implement on them tomorrow, and it's going to be different and worse. And eventually all of it's going to be covered, and no one will be able to speak.
Yeah, I agree. I think the funny thing is that you can extrapolate this view in many cases to just a lot of interpretive government in general. It's like, he gives a great example of, here's something that people want banned because they find it offensive. Here's a bunch of other things that could be interpretive as offensive. and you show just the interpretive framework that a government that is, that concentrates all the power to define what is or isn't offensive, controls the entire power structure. And so it's like, think about the courts. Well, the courts can define, a shutdown of the, of all the work. The fact that the government ordered a shutdown of all businesses, they can rule that, oh, that's constitutional because it was a threat. And the government, most people want the government to be able to protect us from a threat. And so they defined a threat as coronavirus. And so then you can have emergency orders everywhere, right? You can slip an emergency clause into a bill so that it can't get, referendum by citizens because it's a climate emergency, whatever it is. You can always shift these goalposts. And I think he shows how that's possible in this specific example. I think it's broadly possible in all kinds of realms of government. As far as the free speech thing goes, like I loved what you're saying about offensive speech too. It makes me think of the one of the first things I remember hearing from Jordan Peterson in that infamous interview about the "So What You're Saying Is." And she asks, why do you need to say things that are offensive? And he said something along the lines of, because you have to risk saying something offensive in order to say anything important at all or anything meaningful at all. And that's not to say everything important or meaningful is offensive, but you have to at least risk being offensive in order to say something meaningful or important. And so, not to say that, misgendering in that case is saying something important or meaningful necessarily. You can say it to be offensive. You can say it just to be a jerk. But you can also say things like that, like you said, one is a mistake, or two, to highlight actual real truth. And that's the problem, is we're living in a society and a culture that is not concerned with what truth is and is instead concerned with making sure people feel okay. And look, I'm not promoting the idea that we should make people uncomfortable or make them feel harmed or hurt for no reason. But I do think that it's important that when there are things that are harmful or hurtful to people, that it if that's the cost of highlighting the truth, in many cases that's the cost you need to pay in order to have a society that functions and just people living in reality and ultimately doing less harm to themselves. Because when people live in a state of dissonance from the truth, it oftentimes becomes much more harmful to them in the long term than it otherwise would have been if you'd cut it off early and risked just a little bit of offense.
Yeah. I mean, and the slippery slope, that you kind of allude to is very present, like in the Canada stuff with Jordan Peterson, the Bill C-16, which his disagreement with kind of catapulted him into the public sphere. He was basically saying, hey, this is not good. This is criminalizing certain types of speech, and eventually it will lead to compelled speech, where not only are you not allowed to say certain things, but you are now forced to say things. And everyone dismissed him, and this is back in 2015 and 2016, as just being, crazy and, being an alarmist and not, whatever. And now it's like you fast forward to today and you see that, if a parent refuses to refer to their child by the pronouns that their school has kind of fed into their brain to be, that child can be taken away. You can be dragged before a human rights commission, for discipline. And Jordan Peterson himself, right, is being all of his licenses, his ability to practice psychology within Canada is also being challenged with that. So it only took a few years for the definition of that to be expanded. And that's any sort of policy that is motivated by power and is motivated by, is Marxist at heart, right, is for it to expand itself in such a way that they can make the words mean anything, right? Like I think about Animal Farm by Orwell, and it's like the rules of what type of animals are good continues to expand, right? Like they
Yep.
first talk about men are bad, and it's like, well, any animal that can, walk on 2 feet or whatever is superior, and it just continues to evolve. And that's what the tricky use of this language does, is it makes it so that people in power can twist and manipulate in such a way that they make the general populace believe that one person is bad when they would have been totally fine just the other day. So we need to resist this and call it out whenever we see it and encounter it in public.
Yeah. I'd say the last thing is that this is such an indictment on the university system, considering more people and millennials and stuff have gone to college than any other, that there's just been an increase in that. And of course, universities were supposed to be these places of a free exchange of thought and more conversation,
Yep.
and they come out believing this kind of stuff is an utter failure of this university system.
Yeah. Agreed.
Absolutely. All right. And our last take here is a meme that reads, if a monkey hoarded more bananas than it could eat, while most of the other monkeys starved, scientists would study that monkey to figure out what the heck was wrong with it. When humans do it, we put them on the cover of Forbes. What do you take, or what do you think of this take here, Britt?
Well, if we were to make this analogous, right, like to the like humans to monkey, monkey example, like it would have to be, and I guess we do put some of these characters on the cover of Forbes, but I think about like a warlord in Africa, right, which doesn't produce anything necessarily other than fear and violence. And yes, he does hoard all of the food and wealth and treasure for himself at the expense of other people. But we don't say that that person's doing something awesome, right? Like we're like, oh, that's an awful thing that they're doing. And whereas with someone like Jeff Bezos or any of these billionaires that they talk about, like the only way these people accrue any wealth, it's actually a small percentage of the wealth that they generate for everyone. So a more analogous thing for like a monkey would be like, well, a monkey becomes brilliant and makes a banana farm, and then and he has 10 times more bananas than anyone else. But all the other monkeys also have twice as many bananas as they otherwise would have had. So that's the only way that wealth is actually accrued in a just society. And capitalism makes it incentivizes people. Jeff Bezos is doing much better than the warlord I was talking about before, right? The warlord has to live in constant fear that one of his subordinates is going to come up and destroy him, or that he's going to lose his wealth and gains via the same methods that he took them from. Whereas someone in a stable society like the United States, or more stable society like the United States, gains their wealth from ways that are sustainable over the long period of time that they'll probably be able to pass down to their family. And they also they employ tons of different people, and everyone else is better off because of their actions. I'm saying that in a general sense because in our society, with a lot of the crony capitalism that does occur and the interwoven, government with business, sometimes there are less optimal outcomes that occur. But in general, the only way to accrue more money than anyone else around you has is to also make everyone else a bit rich as well, and to offer them things that they otherwise wouldn't be able to get.
Yeah, and the thing that I will say is like I don't love the cultural state we're in where there is a lot of this, like people at the top really trying to sort of break the piggy bank now, burn the turf, not care about tomorrow, not invest. Because I do think that to some degree there is some of this going on if you just look culturally, right? But the the funny thing is like this person who's calling this out, they don't like provide the solution as to why, and they revert back to the idea of like nature, like, oh, monkeys do this and we try to figure out what's wrong because the natural state of things is just naturally sharing, and that's just not even remotely true. Like
No.
if you looked at monkeys in the wild, like they might look out for their tribe, but ultimately it is a sort of like I'm gonna look out for me and my tribe, and that's it. And so you'd have to kind of compare apples to apples here, and to say that in reality, Jeff Bezos does that. Even if he was this sort of villain caricature that they want to point to him as, he is looking out for his family, for his tribe, for his clan. And then broadly, he looked out for his company when he was in charge of that. And it's like he does do these things on the relative scale. I don't think nature is a good counter juxtaposition to what I do see as sort of a human tendency to greed. I think that one of the problems is the secularization of the workplace, where we've taken this idea that the public life needs to be entirely separate from your private life, and these values shouldn't bleed. And then you end up with the values of capitalism, which I wouldn't say are inherently wrong, but the problem is they take over the values of virtue. And so then, men are rewarded for being competitive and putting themselves first and selfish, which is, again, can be a healthy thing to grow a business, to grow produce. And I think that, again, capitalism takes advantage of that and distributes that in the best way possible known to man. But then the problem is those become the central tenets and virtues of the individual, instead of things like caring for your community, caring to be a family man first and foremost, and those kinds of things that I think, personally, a Judeo-Christian upbringing is going to be the best at producing, and a Judeo-Christian culture is going to emphasize those things more than others. And so it's just kind of funny to me, because it's like you kind of diagnose a problem, but then you misdiagnose the solution, and you try to compare the wrong solution to it. You try to say why it's wrong. All it's like you can maybe identify one part of this that isn't entirely incorrect, but for the most part, this is a pretty bad take, I think.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, that we have failed to separate like personal from like the actual mechanisms and incentives that occur within a capitalistic society. And I think about John Mackey from Whole Foods. Like, he's got this book called Conscious Capitalism, which is awesome. And a lot of the points that are made in are like, hey, like the only way for someone to ethically accrue enough resources to be extraordinarily generous is through capitalism. And you and I both would agree, as Christians, that like no matter what strata of wealth you come from, or what strata of wealth you have propelled yourself into, like, you are supposed to be generous. And that's what we're commanded to be. But the only society that allows for you to accrue the wealth in such a way that has the incentives for you to, even while you're being greedy, to simultaneously make it better for other people, is capitalism. It's one of the most amazing things that has lifted people out of poverty, without any sort of requirement for altruism in there, other than the interest of, I need to produce something that is awesome that other people like. Right. And if you do that, then everyone else is better off, and you're going to be a lot better off. There are literally whole companies dedicated to finding out new business ventures and new products and things that need to be developed, that solve problems for people, that make their lives better. And I've said this tons of times before on the show, but one of my favorite examples that you give all the time is that the people that benefited from indoor plumbing were not the rich people. They already had the servants to take out their chamber pots, but it was the poor people, right, that had to deal with their human waste in ways that are unimaginable to us today. But because of that, because of things like running water and making things clean and sanitation and all this stuff, like, people that are the poorest today in the United States have an unprecedented level and lifestyle that has never been heard of before, within the last 100 years, that only kings of, the 1500s could barely dream of, a level of health and wealth and all these things. So capitalism is awesome. This is a terrible analogy and a bad take, because it's not really analogous to what actually occurs. And the fact of the matter is that when we do see people that do behave this way, yeah, we might put them on the cover of Forbes, but it's not because we think that they're awesome. It's because they're usually vilified and awful people that have accrued things through ill-gotten means.
Yeah, exactly right. And frankly, if we are putting people on the cover of Forbes who embody this kind of spirit, we have no one to blame but a culture that has pushed values out, I think, and has chosen, I kind of doubt the author of this meme is rushing to embrace Christian values in the public sphere. I could be wrong about that. Maybe this is just a very trad, communist Christian page or something like that. But I think that, I think the fact that they try to make the analogy to say return to nature, almost like a romanticist like Jean-Jacques Rousseau or something, to say like that is, we would identify that there's a problem if we look back to nature where the monkeys aren't doing. We would say that's an abnormal state of things, and we just need to reject the society that's brought us here. I think that is a complete misdiagnosis of the problem, and completely out of sync with what the natural tendencies of humans and just of nature are in general.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that will be our show for today. So thank you guys for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to share it and like and subscribe, all that good stuff. And we'll catch you on the next one.